The morning started like any other Sunday for Mai. She was sitting at her small kitchen table, enjoying the peaceful ritual of her morning coffee while scrolling through photos from her friend's recent wedding. The autumn sunlight streamed through her kitchen window, creating patterns on the worn wooden table, the same table where she'd spent countless hours planning her dream bakery. Little did she know that this ordinary moment would be the last peaceful one she'd had for a long time. The sharp ring of her phone cut through the quiet. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw it was her sister-in-law calling. They rarely spoke, especially not this early on a weekend. "Hello," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady despite the sudden sense of unease. Mom collapsed. The words came through in a rush. "They think it's a stroke. They're taking her to Central Hospital right now." The room seemed to tilt slightly as Mai processed the information. Her mother-in-law, who had always seemed like an immovable pillar of strength despite their complicated relationship, was now fighting for her life. Mi's hands trembled as she immediately started looking up flights on her laptop. Living 3 states away had always been a point of tension with her in-laws, who believed family should stay close together. Now that distance felt like an unbearable gulf. Her husband Raj was unreachable at a business conference in Europe, and her mind raced with all the decisions she might have to make alone. "Have you reached Raj?" her sister-in-law asked, her voice tight with worry and something else, perhaps judgment. Mai could almost hear the unspoken criticism. Why wasn't he home? Why weren't they living closer? Why was she, the daughter-in-law, the only one available in this crisis? "He's in meetings all day," Mai explained, trying to keep the defensiveness out of her voice. "The time difference. I'll keep trying." She found a flight leaving in 3 hours and booked it without hesitation, her finger hovering only briefly over the confirm purchase button as she saw the last-minute fare price. As she threw clothes into a carry-on bag, her phone buzzed with updates from the hospital. The situation was critical. They needed family there immediately to discuss treatment options. Insurance information was missing or outdated. Forms needed to be signed. Decisions needed to be made. Mi's mind wandered to the thick folder in her home office labeled Bakery Business Plan. Inside were years of research, supplier contacts, and careful financial projections. Her savings account held exactly $175,000, not nearly enough to open the high-end bakery she dreamed of, but enough to start a modest one. Every extra penny she'd earned from her accounting job over the past 15 years had gone into that account. She'd skipped vacations, bought second-hand furniture, and packed lunches while her colleagues ordered takeout. That money represented more than just dollars. It was 15 years of dedication to a dream. The Uber ride to the airport felt surreal. The driver tried to make cheerful conversation, but Mai could only manage brief responses. Her mind was split between worry for her mother-in-law and increasingly desperate attempts to reach Raj. Each call went straight to voicemail. Each message she sent remained unread. At the airport, rushing through security, another call came in, this time from the hospital. They needed a substantial deposit before they could proceed with the emergency procedure. The doctor's voice was sympathetic but firm. Time was critical in stroke cases. They needed to act fast. Mai found herself in the awkward space between gates B23 and B24, pressed against the wall as travelers streamed past. Her hands shook as she logged into her banking app. The decision loomed before her: use the money now and potentially save her mother-in-law's life, or wait to consult with Raj and risk precious time. She thought about her mother-in-law, a proud woman who had never fully approved of her son's choice to marry someone from outside their community. Their relationship had been cordial but cool, marked by cultural misunderstandings and different expectations about family roles. Yet none of that seemed to matter now. This wasn't about their past relationship, it was about doing what was right. Taking a deep breath, Mai initiated the transfer. The sum that represented countless early mornings, late nights, and sacrificed dreams moved from her account to the hospital's with a simple tap on her phone screen. She felt oddly calm after making the decision, even as the confirmation email arrived showing her account's new balance: $320.15. As she boarded her flight, Mai realized she hadn't even had time to close up her house properly. The coffee cup still sat on the kitchen table, probably cold now, a small reminder of how quickly life could change. The 5-hour flight ahead would give her plenty of time to worry about the consequences of her decision, but for now, she focused on the immediate tasks: getting to the hospital, being there for her mother-in-law, and somehow reaching Raj. What she couldn't know, was that this was just the beginning. The financial sacrifice she just made would set in motion a chain of events that would test not just her relationship with her in-laws, but the very foundation of her marriage and her understanding of family loyalty. The hospital corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before May as she followed a nurse to the ICU. The antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting made everything feel slightly unreal, like walking through a dream. Her carry-on bag wheels squeaked against the polished floor. She hadn't even taken the time to find a hotel before coming straight from the airport. When she finally saw her mother-in-law, the sight stopped her in her tracks. The strong-willed woman who had always carried herself with such dignity now looked small and vulnerable, surrounded by beeping machines and clear plastic tubes. The doctor was waiting for Mai, clipboard in hand and a grave expression on his face. "We need to perform the procedure within the next hour," he explained, his voice gentle but urgent. "The stroke has caused significant bleeding in her brain. Without intervention." He didn't need to finish the sentence. May understood what was at stake. The financial coordinator appeared moments later, a folder thick with forms. "The initial deposit we discussed over the phone will cover the immediate procedure," she explained, "but there will be additional costs for the post-operative care, medication, and rehabilitation." She slid a paper across the desk showing estimated costs that made May's head spin. Mai pulled out her phone again, checking for any response from Raj. Still nothing. She'd left 12 voicemails and sent 23 messages. The conference center in Europe confirmed he was there but couldn't interrupt the closed-door sessions. Her sister-in-law had tried reaching Raj's cousins for financial help, but they were all too busy to answer. Looking at her mother-in-law through the ICU window, May remembered the first time they'd met. It was at a family dinner 6 years ago, where the older woman had served her specialty dumplings but hadn't quite met May's eyes. There had always been an invisible wall between them, built from different languages, different customs, different expectations. Yet now, none of those differences mattered. May's phone buzzed. For a moment, her heart leaped, thinking it might be Raj. Instead, it was an automated email from her bank, confirming her recent transfer. She opened her banking app again, staring at the numbers. Her business savings account now showed a balance lower than when she opened it 15 years ago. The other account, meant for regular expenses, had just enough to cover next month's rent. She thought about her little notebook, tucked away in her apartment, filled with sketches of wedding cakes and bread displays. She'd spent years researching industrial ovens, pricing wholesale ingredients, and comparing retail spaces. Every time she walked past an empty storefront, she'd imagine her bakery there, with its warm lights and the smell of fresh bread drawing people in. The doctor cleared his throat gently, pulling her back to the present moment. "Mrs. Chen," he said, using her married name, "we really need to begin prep for surgery. Do you have any other questions about the procedure?" May straightened her shoulders. "No," she said firmly. "Please do whatever you need to do to save her." She signed the consent forms, her signature slightly shaky but determined. The financial coordinator slid over more paperwork, payment agreements, insurance forms, financial responsibility documents. May signed them all. As the medical team prepared for surgery, May found herself alone in the waiting room. The TV mounted on the wall played muted news headlines. A vending machine hummed in the corner. She pulled out her phone one more time, not to check for messages, but to look at photos of her dream bakery's inspiration board. Beautiful layer cakes, artisan bread loaves, delicate pastries, all the things she'd planned to create. With a deep breath, she deleted the entire photo album. A kind-faced nurse brought her a cup of surprisingly decent coffee. "It'll be several hours," she explained. "You should try to rest." But rest was impossible. Instead, May found herself doing mental calculations. How long would it take to save up that amount again? Could she pick up extra accounting work? Maybe she could start smaller, with just a counter in someone else's shop. But deep down, she knew the truth. At her age, with rising costs and the competitive market, this had probably been her only shot at opening her own bakery. The dream she'd carried since she was a young girl, watching her grandmother bake mooncakes for the Mid-Autumn Festival, was slipping away like sugar dissolving in hot tea. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from her sister-in-law. "Other family members arriving tomorrow. Why did you make financial decisions without consulting anyone? This isn't your place." May felt a flicker of anger, quickly replaced by resignation. Of course they would see it that way. She was just the daughter-in-law, the outsider who had married their precious son. Never mind that she was the only one who had shown up, the only one who had anything to give. She typed back a simple response. The doctors needed an immediate decision. Then she turned off her phone. Whatever judgment the family wanted to pass could wait until after the surgery. Right now, all that mattered was her mother-in-law making it through the next few hours. Outside the hospital windows, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Mai pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching her breath create small clouds of fog. She thought about how quickly life could change, how one phone call could erase 15 years of careful planning. Yet somehow, sitting there in that sterile waiting room, she felt oddly at peace with her decision. Some things, she realized, were worth more than money, even if not everyone would understand why. Days in the hospital began to blur together. Mai had found a cheap motel nearby, but she spent most of her time in the ITU's uncomfortable chairs, watching her mother-in-law's chest rise and fall with each breath. The surgery had been successful, but recovery was proving to be a slow, uncertain journey. Finally, on the fourth day, Raj called. His voice crackled over the international line, thick with worry and exhaustion. "I'm booking a flight home," he said. "I can't believe this happened. How are we handling the hospital bills?" Mei's throat tightened. She'd rehearsed this conversation countless times in her head, but now the words wouldn't come. "Don't worry about that right now," she managed. "Just focus on getting here safely." She could hear the relief in his voice, assuming the hospital was being flexible about payment terms. The guilt of her silence sat heavy in her stomach, but she couldn't bear to have this conversation over the phone. Her sister-in-law appeared each afternoon, always with a subtle reminder that Mai was an outsider. "Mom always said hospitals should be for immediate family only," she'd mentioned casually, or "It's strange how you're making all these decisions when you're just the daughter-in-law." Each comment was like a paper cut, small but stinging. One morning, Mai was reviewing some medical forms when she noticed her mother-in-law's eyes flutter open. The older woman looked confused, then focused on Mei's face. Her hand moved slightly on the blanket, and Mai reached for it instinctively. To her surprise, her mother-in-law squeezed back weakly. The doctor was encouraged by the response. "She's showing good signs of recovery," he explained. "But the path ahead will be challenging. She'll need extensive rehabilitation, special equipment at home, possibly in home care." Each word represented another cost, another drain on resources that no longer existed. That evening, Mai checked her regular bank account. The rent payment would clear, but just barely. She'd have to find a way to make next month's rent soon. Her credit card was already stretched thin from the motel charges and hospital cafeteria meals. Still, watching her mother-in-law respond to simple commands and squeeze the doctor's hand made it all seem worth it. Raj's cousins finally showed up, bringing fruit baskets and opinions. They'd huddled in the corner of the hospital room, speaking rapidly in their native language, which Mai had never fully mastered. She caught phrases here and there, mostly criticisms about the hospital choice, the treatment plan, the fact that she was still there. "Why don't you go home?" one cousin suggested, not unkindly. "You must have work to return to." What they didn't know was that Mai had already used up all her vacation days and was now taking unpaid leave. Another sacrifice that would make next month's finances even tighter. Late that night, alone in her motel room, Mai opened her laptop and looked at job listings. Maybe she could find weekend work or take on freelance accounting projects. The bakery dream might be gone, but she still had bills to pay. Her eyes burned with exhaustion as she scrolled through possibilities, each one a reminder of how much her life had changed in just a few days. Her phone lit up with a text from Raj. "Just boarded. We'll be there in 14 hours. Don't tell Mom yet. Want to surprise her. Also, checked our joint account. Why is it so low? Did you move money somewhere?" Meg stared at the message for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to explain everything. Instead, she wrote back, "Safe travels. We'll talk when you get here." She added a heart emoji, wondering if it might be the last one she'd sent in for a while. The next morning, she brought a small photo album to the hospital. While her mother-in-law dozed, May showed her pictures of Raj as a child that she'd found in the album. Even in sleep, the older woman seemed to respond to her son's name, her face relaxing slightly. A new nurse came in to check vitals. "You must be the daughter," she said warmly. May started to correct her, then stopped. What did it matter? She was here, doing what family does. The titles and relationships seemed less important than the simple act of showing up, of staying, of caring. That afternoon, her sister-in-law brought several relatives Mai had never met. They filled the room with chatter and food, largely ignoring her presence. One elderly aunt pulled her aside. "You know," she said in heavily accented English, "in our culture, these matters are handled by blood family." The message was clear. You don't belong here. May smiled politely and excused herself to get coffee. In the hospital cafeteria, she watched her hands shake as she stirred sugar into her cup. The weight of her secret felt heavier with each passing hour. Soon Raj would arrive, and everything would change. Would he understand why she'd made this choice alone? Would he forgive her for not waiting to discuss it? Would his family ever see her sacrifice as an act of love rather than interference? Her phone buzzed with another bank alert. Her automatic student loan payment had gone through, pushing her account dangerously close to zero. She deleted the notification without opening it. Some problems would have to wait. Right now, watching her mother-in-law grow stronger each day was all that mattered. The rest, the money, the explanations, the future, that would all have to sort itself out later. As she walked back to the ICU, May caught her reflection in a window. She looked tired, worried, older somehow, but there was something else in her face too, a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. Whatever came next, she knew she'd done the right thing. Even if no one else ever understood, she would carry that certainty with her always. The rehabilitation center was quieter than the hospital, with soft beige walls and the gentle whir of exercise equipment. May watched through the window as her mother-in-law gripped the parallel bars, determination etched on her face as she took one shaky step forward. 3 months had passed since the stroke, and every small victory felt like a miracle. Raj stood beside her, his hand no longer reaching for hers like it used to. The strain between them had grown with each passing week, each unexplained bank statement, each avoided conversation about money. He'd thrown himself into work since returning, leaving May to handle most of the rehabilitation coordination alone. The insurance company called again, he mentioned, his voice carefully neutral. "They're asking about the initial payment. Said it came from a personal account, not their system. Do you know anything about that?" May's heart raced. "I'll handle it," she said softly, watching her mother-in-law complete another step. The physical therapist beamed encouragement, unaware of the tension crackling between the observers. Later that afternoon, May met with the home care agency. Their 3-bedroom house needed modifications: a wheelchair ramp, bathroom rails, a special bed. Each item on the list represented another expense, another dip into credit cards that were already straining at their limits. She picked up weekend bookkeeping work at a local restaurant, but it barely covered the interest payments. "We can start with the essential items," the coordinator suggested, noting May's expression. Perhaps family members could contribute. The question hung in the air, heavy with irony. Raj's cousins, so quick with advice and criticism, had been mysteriously unavailable when it came to financial support. At home that evening, May found Raj studying their bank statements at the kitchen table. The same table where, months ago, she'd sat planning her bakery. That dream felt like it belonged to someone else now, someone from a different lifetime. "I don't understand," he said, spreading out the papers. "Our savings account shows almost no activity for 15 years, then suddenly everything's gone. The bank said you made the withdrawal, but that can't be right. We were saving that for our future." May busied herself making tea, buying precious seconds. "Your mother's life is our future," she finally said, her back still turned. "The hospital needed immediate payment for the surgery. You were unreachable. I made a choice." The silence that followed felt endless. When she finally turned around, Raj's face had gone pale. "You spent our savings? Without talking to me?" That money was for our dreams, our plans. She could have died, May said quietly. Would you have preferred I waited? Called a family meeting while your mother lay there needing emergency surgery? You should have found another way. Called my cousins, taken a loan something. His voice rose with each word. Do you know what my family will say when they find out? That you took control, made decisions that weren't yours to make. May set the teacup down with trembling hands. Your family? Where was your family when the hospital needed payment? When your mother needed someone to coordinate her care? To sit with her through therapy? To plan for her recovery? The argument might have escalated further, but May's phone buzzed, the night nurse at the rehabilitation center. Her mother-in-law was asking for her son. The fight deflated instantly, replaced by the familiar routine of duty and care. The drive to the center was silent. May watched the streetlights blur past, remembering how her mother-in-law had squeezed her hand that first day in the hospital. Would that small moment of connection matter once the truth came out? Or would it be forgotten in the storm of family pride and cultural expectations? At the center, her mother-in-law was having a good night. She managed to feed herself dinner and even spoke a few clear words. The night nurse praised her progress, mentioning how the daily therapy sessions were paying off. Sessions that Mai had arranged and that their dwindling resources barely covered. Standing in the corner of the room, watching Raj help his mother with her water cup, May felt the weight of her secret starting to crush her. The money was spent, the dream was gone, and soon everyone would know. She'd sacrificed everything for family, but would family sacrifice their pride and prejudices for her? On the drive home, Raj broke the silence. We need to tell them, he said. All of them. About the money, the decisions, everything. They're already asking questions about the hospital bills. May nodded, her throat tight. She knew this moment had been coming, had been dreading it for months. The family would see her actions as overstepping, as taking control where she had no right. They wouldn't understand that sometimes love means acting without permission, that sometimes the right choice feels like the hardest one. That night, lying awake in bed, May listened to Raj's steady breathing beside her. The distance between them felt wider than ever, though they lay just inches apart. Tomorrow would bring more therapy sessions, more family tensions, more financial juggling. But for now, in the quiet darkness, she allowed herself to remember the peace she'd felt in that hospital waiting room, knowing she'd chosen love over money, care over caution, family over dreams. Some sacrifices, she thought, don't need witnesses to be worthy. Some choices validate themselves, not through others' approval, but through the quiet certainty that in a moment of crisis, you did the right thing. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window as May measured rice into the cooker. After 4 months of hospital rooms and rehabilitation centers, her mother-in-law was finally coming home. The house hummed with nervous energy as Mai prepared all the traditional dishes she'd learned to cook over the years of her marriage. Her hands moved automatically, chopping vegetables for the soup her mother-in-law had once taught her to make. The memory was clear, standing in this same kitchen 3 years ago, watching the older woman's precise movements, trying to bridge their differences through shared cuisine. Now, May added ginger to the broth, hoping the familiar tastes of home would help ease the transition. The house had been transformed over the past week. The living room furniture was rearranged to accommodate a hospital bed and medical equipment. New handrails lined the hallway walls, their metal gleaming under fresh installation. The bathroom had been completely renovated with safety features, another expense added to their mounting credit card debt. Mi's phone buzzed with a text from her sister-in-law. Family meeting tonight before Mom comes home tomorrow. Everyone needs to be there. The message sent a chill down her spine. She knew what this meant. The questions about money could no longer be avoided. The soup simmered on the stove as Mai started on the dumplings. Her mother-in-law had always been proud of her dumpling recipe, passing it down through generations. Mai had practiced countless times, trying to get the plates just right. Today, her fingers trembled slightly as she folded each wrapper, thinking about the family meeting ahead. Reg came home early, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder. He stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her work. "It smells like Mom's cooking," he said softly. There was something in his voice, nostalgia mixed with sadness. Things between them had been strained since their argument about the money, conversations limited to practical matters about his mother's care. I want everything to be perfect for her homecoming, Meg replied, not looking up from her dumpling folding. The doctor said familiar routines will help with recovery. The whole family will be here tonight, Reg said, loosening his tie. All the aunts, uncles, cousins. They'd want to discuss everything. The weight of that last word hung heavy in the air between them. May nodded, still focusing on the dumplings. I know. Your sister texted. She hesitated, then added, should I be there? The silence that followed her question lasted a moment too long. Of course, Reg finally said, but his tone lacked conviction. Your family too. As evening approached, May changed into her best sweater and carefully applied light makeup. She could hear cars pulling up outside, voices speaking in rapid Mandarin. The house gradually filled with relatives, some she hadn't seen since the wedding. They gathered in the living room, their chatter dying down as she entered with a tray of tea. The oldest uncle cleared his throat. Now that everyone is here, he began in Mandarin, then switched to English, presumably for May's benefit. We need to discuss what happened at the hospital. May's hands clenched in her lap as the story unfolded. The family had discovered the source of the hospital payment. Questions flew around the room. How dare she make such a decision without consulting anyone? Who did she think she was, taking control like that? What gave her the right to act on behalf of the family? I had no choice, May said quietly when the room finally fell silent. The hospital needed immediate payment. No one else was reachable. They said every minute counted. There are always choices, Reg's aunt interrupted. You could have waited, called more relatives, found other solutions. Instead, you acted alone, like an outsider trying to prove something. The word outsider stung, even after all these years. May looked at Reg, hoping for support, but he sat with his head bowed, caught between family loyalty and marital duty. Tomorrow is about Mother's homecoming, the oldest uncle declared finally. We will discuss the financial matter later. For now, we need to focus on proper arrangements, traditional ways. The meaning was clear in his tone. Proper arrangements, traditional ways, everything May, despite her years of effort, would never fully understand or be part of. Later that night, after everyone left, May stood in the kitchen putting away leftovers. The dumplings she'd made sat largely untouched. The family had brought their own food. She could hear Rage on the phone in the other room, speaking softly in Mandarin. Her name drifted through the door occasionally, followed by lengthy explanations. She looked around the kitchen she'd spent all day cooking in, at the dishes she'd prepared with such hope and care. Tomorrow, her mother-in-law would come home to a house full of family, traditional foods, and familiar faces. Everything had been prepared perfectly. The medical equipment hidden discreetly behind screens, the new safety features blending seamlessly with the decor, all her savings poured into making this transition smooth and comfortable. As Mai packed the last of the dumplings into containers, she realized with a sudden clarity that despite all her efforts, despite the sacrifice of her dreams and savings, she was still seen as the outsider who had overstepped. Tomorrow's homecoming wasn't just about her mother-in-law's return. It was about the family reclaiming control, re-establishing traditional boundaries, and putting her back in her place. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as she wiped down the counters one last time. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, she had done everything she could, given everything she had. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. The morning of the homecoming dawned bright and clear. Mai woke up early, her heart racing with anticipation. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night tossing and turning, rehearsing what she would say to her mother-in-law. The house was spotless, every surface gleaming, every detail perfect for the welcome home celebration. Rage had left before sunrise, saying he needed to help with the hospital discharge papers. I'll see you at the house, he mumbled, avoiding her eyes. Something in his tone made her uneasy, but she pushed the feeling aside. Today wasn't about her or their strained relationship, it was about his mother coming home. May checked her reflection one last time before leaving. She'd chosen a traditional outfit, hoping to show respect for the occasion. The delicate silk felt foreign against her skin, but she wanted everything to be perfect. In her arms, she carried a basket of her mother-in-law's favorite fruits and the special tea she tracked down from a specialty import store. The drive to her in-laws' house felt longer than usual. Each traffic light seemed to catch her, each minute stretching endlessly. She'd helped set up the house yesterday, arranging the medical equipment, stocking the kitchen with soft foods, placing fresh flowers in every room. Everything was ready. As she turned onto their street, she noticed several cars already parked outside the house. Her sister-in-law's sleek SUV, the aunt's sensible sedans, even some vehicles she didn't recognize. The family must have gathered early to welcome their matriarch home. Mai parked across the street, gathering her things. Through the front window, she could see movement inside. People bustling about, arranging things, talking animatedly. The scene looked warm and inviting, like a happy family reunion. Her heels clicked against the sidewalk as she approached the front door. She reached for the handle, then stopped. Something felt off. Through the window, she could see her mother-in-law already seated in her favorite chair, Raj kneeling beside her. But hadn't he said he was just leaving for the hospital? Confused, Mai rang the doorbell. The bustling inside quieted immediately. Footsteps approached, and her sister-in-law opened the door, but only partway, her body blocking the entrance. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. Mai blinked, clutching her basket tighter. "I'm here for the homecoming. I brought Mother's favorite fruits and—" "The family is already here," her sister-in-law cut in. "All the family that needs to be here." The words hit Mai like a physical blow. Through the gap in the door, she could see more now. The table set with traditional dishes, family members gathered around, Raj still by his mother's side. No one looked toward the door. "I don't understand," Mai said, her voice barely a whisper. "I helped prepare everything. I've been coordinating the care, the therapy, the—" "Yes, you've done quite enough." An aunt appeared behind her sister-in-law. "More than enough. Making decisions without consulting anyone, spending family money as if it were your own. We're grateful for your help, but now it's time for real family to take care of things." Real family? The basket felt heavy in Mai's arms. "I am family. I'm her daughter-in-law. I've been here every day. You've overstepped," the aunt said firmly. "In our culture, these matters are handled differently. You may have meant well, but you've caused enough disruption. The family has decided it's better if you step back now." Mai looked past them, searching for Raj. He was still kneeling by his mother, but his shoulders were tense. He knew she was there, but he wouldn't turn around. "Can I at least say hello?" Mai asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "Just for a moment?" Her sister-in-law's expression hardened. Mother is tired. She needs calm, familiar surroundings. People who understand our ways. Perhaps in a few weeks, once she's settled. The dismissal was clear. Mai stood there, still holding her basket of carefully chosen fruits, wearing the traditional clothes she bought specially for this day. Through the window, she could see the medical equipment she arranged, the safety modifications she'd coordinated, all paid for with her sacrificed dreams. Someone inside called out something in Mandarin, and both women turned away from the door. Before Mai could say another word, the door closed firmly in her face. She stood there frozen, listening to the muffled sounds of family conversation resuming inside. The walk back to her car felt endless. Her legs moved automatically, carrying her away from the house where she'd spent countless hours preparing for this day. The basket hung heavy in her arms, fruits chosen with such care now seeming foolish and unnecessary. Sitting in her car, Mai watched the house through blurry eyes. The curtains were drawn now, but she could still see shadows moving inside, hear faint laughter. All the nights spent researching therapy options, all the hours coordinating with doctors, all her savings poured into ensuring the best care possible, none of it mattered. In their eyes, she would always be the outsider who had overstepped. Her phone lay silent in her lap. No message from Raj, no explanation, no apology. Just silence, perhaps the loudest statement of all. In trying to save her mother-in-law's life, she had somehow lost everything else. Her savings, her dream, and now, it seemed, her marriage too. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Mai sat there, unable to drive away just yet. She watched other cars arrive, more relatives going inside, the celebration continuing without her. Each person who walked past her car without a glance was another reminder. Sometimes doing the right thing comes at a cost no one warns you about. The first week after the homecoming passed in a blur. Mai threw herself into work, picking up extra accounting projects to keep her mind occupied. Her tiny apartment felt emptier than ever. Rage hadn't come home since that day, sending only a brief text saying he needed to stay with his mother. The space that had once felt cozy now echoed with absence. Late one evening, while sorting through her files, she found her old bakery business plan. The pages were worn at the corners from years of hopeful handling. She'd planned everything so carefully, the layout, the recipes, even the color scheme for the walls. Now those dreams sat in her hands like pressed flowers, beautiful but lifeless. Her phone rarely rang anymore. The hospital bills and rehabilitation center statements still arrived, addressed to her, since she'd been the one to sign all the papers. She sorted them methodically, forwarding them to her sister-in-law's email without comment. The replies, when they came, were equally brief and businesslike. One morning, she drove past her mother-in-law's house on her way to work. The wheelchair ramp she had installed gleamed in the morning sun. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of movement, her mother-in-law doing her exercises with a new caregiver. The sight brought an unexpected wave of peace. Despite everything, the woman she'd sacrificed so much for was recovering, growing stronger. At work, her colleagues noticed the change in her. "You seem different," her office mate commented one day. "Lighter somehow, even though you look tired." May considered this as she filed another client's tax returns. The weight of her secret was gone now, replaced by a different kind of heaviness, but also, surprisingly, a sense of liberation. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, delivered to her office in a plain brown envelope. Reg's signature was already there, neat and final. The terms were simple. They would each keep their own accounts, their own debts. No mention was made of the savings she'd spent to save his mother's life. In the margins of her copy, she did the math one last time. 15 years of dreams reduced to a single bank transaction. That evening, instead of going home, May drove to the small park where she used to sketch bakery designs during her lunch breaks. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She sat on her favorite bench, watching families pack up their picnic blankets, children calling out last-minute plays on the basketball court. A young couple walked past, the woman laughing at something her partner said. They reminded May of herself and Raj in the early days, before cultural expectations and family obligations had erected walls between them. She wondered if they knew how quickly dreams could change, how love sometimes meant losing everything you thought you wanted. Opening her laptop, May began to type. Not a business plan this time, but a letter to herself. She wrote about the night she'd made the decision to use her savings, about the peace she'd felt in that hospital waiting room. She wrote about the weeks of silent sacrifice, the pride she'd taken in coordinating her mother-in-law's care. She wrote about the pain of exclusion, but also about the strength she'd discovered in herself. As she typed, a new idea began to take shape. Her financial skills, her experience with medical billing and insurance, her understanding of families in crisis, perhaps these weren't just chapters in a sad story. Perhaps they were the foundation for something new. The next morning, May registered for a healthcare administration course. Her savings were gone, but her mind was still sharp, her determination unbroken. She'd learned more about medical systems and patient advocacy in the past few months than some people learn in years. Weeks turned into months. The divorce was finalized without drama. Raj never asked about the money, and May never volunteered the information. She heard through former colleagues that her mother-in-law was doing well, even beginning to walk short distances without assistance. The news brought a smile to her face, genuine despite everything. 1 year to the day after the homecoming incident, May stood in front of a small office space. The sign in the window read, "Patient Advocacy Services," and below it, a name with the credentials she'd earned. It wasn't the bakery she'd dreamed of, but it was something equally meaningful, a way to help other families navigate the maze of medical care and financial decisions. Her first client was a young woman with tears in her eyes, clutching hospital bills she couldn't understand. As May listened to her story, she felt the full circle of her journey. She hadn't just lost her savings and her marriage, she'd gained something valuable, the wisdom to help others through their own crisis moments. That evening, driving home from her new office, May passed a small bakery for sale. The sight didn't bring the usual pang of regret. Instead, she felt a quiet acceptance. Dreams don't always die when they change shape. Sometimes they transform into something we never knew we needed. In her apartment, she made herself a cup of tea using the special blend she'd once bought for her mother-in-law's homecoming. The taste was bittersweet, like most meaningful memories. On her desk sat a framed quote she'd discovered during her darkest days. Some people spend their whole lives seeking the right path, while others create their own. Mi touched the frame gently. She had lost her savings, her marriage, and her place in a family she'd tried so hard to belong to. But she'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that doing the right thing, even at great personal cost, even without recognition or gratitude, was its own kind of wealth. She had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, and that strength isn't just about holding on, sometimes it's about building something new from the pieces of broken dreams.